Elvis did have a temper, but not, I mean, and he has lifted up something and just put it on the floor or whatever, or he could.
30 years of silence. 30 years of smiling through interviews, standing at candlelight vigils, defending a dead man's name to anyone who questioned it. Priscilla Presley did not crack once, not publicly. Then, in early 2025, something changed. She gave an interview that stopped people mid-scroll. No dramatic announcement, no press release warning you it was coming. Just a woman in her late 70s, calm, composed, and completely done protecting a version of Elvis Presley that she says the world invented. Her exact words landed like a quiet bomb. The man I married was not who the world thought he was. So, who was he really? And why is she only telling us now? Let's find out. The girl who walked into a legend. Priscilla was 14 years old. That is where this story starts. Not with the music, not with Graceland. With a 14-year-old girl at a party in Bad Nauheim, Germany, sitting in a room full of adults when Elvis Presley walked in and looked directly at her. His name was already everywhere in 1959. The records, the movies, the hysteria. He had been drafted into the US Army and shipped to West Germany, which was the only reason he was even in that room. And Priscilla Beaulieu, daughter of an Air Force officer, had been brought along by a mutual acquaintance who thought she might enjoy meeting him. She did not know what she was walking into. Nobody told her. Nobody warned her. Elvis was 24, a decade older, already famous beyond anything most people experience in a lifetime. And within minutes of meeting her, he asked her to come sit beside him. She sat down. That moment, that one small decision set the course of the next 20 years of her life. What happened next is something Priscilla has described in pieces over the decades. Never the full picture all at once, always selective, always careful. But here is what we know. Elvis became fascinated with her almost immediately. He asked to see her again, then again. He charmed her parents, specifically her stepfather, Captain Paul Beaulieu, who was deeply skeptical. A 24-year-old superstar wanting to spend time with his teenage daughter was not something any father would simply wave through. Elvis sat down with him, looked him in the eye, told him his intentions were honorable, that he respected Priscilla, that he simply enjoyed her company and found her mature beyond her years. Captain Beaulieu allowed it. That phrase, mature beyond her years, would follow Priscilla for a long time. It became the explanation people used, the justification. She was different. She was special. She could handle it. She was still 14. The visits continued. When Elvis eventually returned to America, the letters followed, then the phone calls, then the invitation that changed everything. In 1962, Elvis asked Priscilla's parents if she could come visit him in Memphis. Just a visit, he said. She would stay with his family. Everything would be proper. They agreed. Priscilla flew to America and walked through the gates of Graceland for the first time. She was 16, Elvis was 27. She has described that first visit as overwhelming. The house, the staff, the sheer scale of his world compared to anything she had ever known. Nothing in a military family's life in Germany prepares you for Graceland. She went back to Germany when the visit ended. But something had already shifted. She was no longer just a girl who had met a famous man. She was the girl Elvis Presley wrote letters to, the one he called, the one he wanted to see again. That distinction meant everything at 16. It would cost her something at 30. By 1963, Elvis had asked her parents to let her move to Memphis permanently. He wanted her close. He had a plan, he said. She would finish school in Memphis, live with his father and stepmother, everything above board. Priscilla's parents, particularly her stepfather, pushed back hard. This was not a small ask. Pulling their teenage daughter out of school in Germany to move her across the world to live near a rock and roll star was not something they took lightly. But Elvis was persuasive. He was also Elvis. Eventually, they said yes. Priscilla was 17 when she moved into Graceland. Think about that for a moment. 17 years old, new country, new school, no close friends nearby, no family within thousands of miles. Just Elvis, his household, and the gates of Graceland closing behind her. She has said that she loved him. That has never been in doubt. But love at 17, when the person you love is also the most powerful figure in your entire world, is a complicated thing. There was no version of that relationship where the power sat evenly between them. He was older, famous, wealthy, and fully formed. She was still becoming whoever she was going to be. And here is the part that Priscilla only began speaking about clearly in recent years. Elvis did not just invite her into his life, he directed it. What she wore, how she did her hair, the dark eyeliner that became her signature look, the one that felt so distinctly Priscilla to the outside world. Elvis chose it. He had a specific image in mind, and he shaped her into it, gradually, consistently, without ever making it feel like control. That is what made it so effective. It did not feel like control. It felt like love. It felt like him caring deeply about her, paying attention, wanting her to be her best self. She was a teenager. She did not have the framework yet to see the difference. By the time she did, she had already given him a decade of her life, and they had not even gotten married yet. Behind the gates of Graceland, Graceland has a specific smell in the morning. Priscilla described it once. Bacon from the kitchen. The hum of the air conditioning running all night because Elvis liked it cold. The sounds of staff moving through the house before anyone official was awake. From the outside, it looked like paradise. 14 acres in Memphis, Tennessee. A white columned mansion set back from the road. Fans gathered at the gates daily, pressing their faces against the iron, hoping for a glimpse of something. Inside, it was a different world entirely. Not cruel, not dark in any obvious way, but enclosed, self-contained. A universe with Elvis at the center, and everyone else orbiting around him. Priscilla moved in at 17. She had her own room technically. His father Vernon and stepmother Dee were in the house. Everything looked respectable on paper, but Elvis ran Graceland on his schedule, his rhythm, his rules. He slept during the day and came alive at night. That was not occasional, that was every day. Elvis would be awake until 4 or 5 in the morning, sometimes later, watching movies in the private screening room he had built on the property, playing music, hosting the group of friends and associates who surrounded him constantly, the men who became known as the Memphis Mafia. Priscilla adjusted her entire sleep schedule to match his. She had to. If she wanted to spend time with him, she had to be awake when he was awake. And she was a teenager living in his house, thousands of miles from her family. Spending time with Elvis was the entire point. So she flipped her world upside down. Slept through the mornings, woke in the afternoons, stayed up through the night. This is not a small thing. Sleep deprivation alone reshapes how you think, how you process, how clearly you can see a situation. And for a young woman already completely dependent on one man for companionship, structure, and emotional connection, that kind of disorientation ran deep. Then there was the question of school. Elvis had promised her parents she would finish her education in Memphis. He kept that promise, technically. She enrolled at Immaculate Conception High School. But her life at school and her life at Graceland existed in two completely separate compartments. She could not talk about what happened at home. She could not bring friends back. She could not explain to a classmate why she looked exhausted, or why her evenings were not like anyone else's. She moved through school largely alone. Years later, she admitted that those years felt profoundly isolating. Not because anyone was unkind to her, because she was living a life she could not share with anyone her own age. Her entire emotional world was Graceland. Her entire emotional world was Elvis. That is a dangerous amount of dependence to build in a teenager. Elvis married her in May of 1967 in Las Vegas. She was 21. They had been together for nearly 8 years by then. Most of her adolescence, all of her late teens, folded into his world before she had fully built her own. The wedding photographs are famous. Priscilla in a white gown with an elaborate updo, the heavy eyeliner, the look Elvis had refined over years. She looked stunning. She also looked exactly like the version of herself he had designed. Their daughter Lisa Marie was born 9 months later, February 1968. For a brief period, Priscilla has said, things felt stable, purposeful. She was a mother. She had a role that was entirely her own, one that Elvis had not choreographed for her. But stability inside Graceland was always temporary. The touring picked back up. Elvis was away for long stretches, Las Vegas residencies that ran for weeks, concert tours that kept him on the road, and the Memphis Mafia traveled with him. Priscilla stayed home with Lisa Marie. She has talked about this period with a particular kind of careful restraint. The loneliness of being left behind, the phone calls that came less frequently, the growing awareness that the world Elvis inhabited on the road was a world she was not part of and was not invited into. She started taking karate classes, not because Elvis suggested it, because she needed something that was hers, something she chose, something that had nothing to do with him. She was good at it. Her instructor, Mike Stone, eventually became someone she leaned on emotionally, then more than emotionally. She left Elvis in 1972. They divorced in 1973. Here is what people get wrong about that divorce. They frame it as Priscilla leaving Elvis for another man, a betrayal, a scandal. What they skip is the decade and a half that preceded it, the years of isolation, the schedule that was never hers, the identity built to his specification, the slow, quiet erosion of who she might have been if she had never walked into that room in Germany at 14. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she had finally started to figure out who she actually was, and that person needed more room than Graceland allowed. The secret he kept from everyone, including her. There was a black bag. Elvis carried it everywhere. On tour to Las Vegas, back to Graceland. It went where he went. The Memphis Mafia knew about it. His personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, known to everyone as Dr. Nick, knew about it. Priscilla knew something was in it. She did not know the full extent of what was inside until much later. By then, the damage had been running for years. The bag contained medications, prescription bottles, dozens of them, uppers to get him through performances, downers to bring him off the ceiling afterward, sleeping pills because his body had forgotten how to rest naturally, painkillers layered on top of everything else. This was not occasional. This was daily. This was the operating system Elvis ran on for the last decade of his life. The public had no idea. That is the part that still shocks people when they sit with it. Elvis Presley was one of the most photographed, most written about, most observed human beings on the planet. He performed in front of thousands of people. He gave interviews, he filmed movies, and almost nobody saw it coming. Because Elvis was exceptional at compartmentalization. He kept his private self locked behind a version of himself that was warm, funny, generous, and completely in control. The man who greeted fans, who tipped waiters hundreds of dollars, who bought his friends cars on a whim. That man was real. That was genuinely him. But it was not all of him. Priscilla has spoken carefully about when she first noticed something was wrong. Not a specific date, not a single moment. More like a gradual accumulation of things that did not add up. Elvis would be sharp and present one evening, then foggy and slow the next morning. His moods shifted in ways she could not predict or track. There were nights he was up until dawn, wired and restless, pacing, then days where he barely surfaced. She was young. She had no reference point for what prescription drug dependency looked like in someone high-functioning. Nobody handed her a manual. She asked questions. She got reassurances. His doctor was managing everything, she was told. Everything was under control. It was not under control. Dr. Nicopolis prescribed Elvis thousands of pills in the final years of his life. That is not speculation. That is documented. In 1977 alone, the year Elvis died, Dr. Nick prescribed him over 10,000 doses of sedatives, amphetamines, and narcotics. 10,000 doses in 1 year. When that number came out publicly during the investigation that followed Elvis's death, it landed like a freight train. People who had been inside that world, who had seen pieces of it, suddenly had a number that made everything click into place. Priscilla was no longer married to Elvis by then. They had divorced in '73, but Lisa Marie was still his daughter, still in that house, still moving between two parents whose lives looked nothing alike. What Priscilla has admitted in recent years is that the man she lived with during the marriage was increasingly not the man she had fallen for in Germany. She chooses her words precisely when she talks about this. She is not interested in destroying his image. She never has been. But she has started to say clearly that the Elvis inside Graceland, particularly from the late 1960s onward, was someone she did not always recognize. He became suspicious, intensely so. He worried about people around him having ulterior motives. He tested loyalties. He would cut someone out of his inner circle without warning, and nobody around him would quite understand why. He also became controlling in ways that went beyond the wardrobe and the hairstyle. He monitored her, who she talked to, where she went. He did not like her developing friendships outside of his orbit. The karate classes she eventually took, the ones that gave her the first real sense of independence she had experienced in years, made him deeply uneasy. He saw her building something that did not include him, and he did not know what to do with that. August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley was found unresponsive at Graceland. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, heart failure. But the toxicology report told a more complicated story. Multiple prescription drugs were found in his system at the time of death. The precise role they played has been debated ever since. Priscilla got the call that afternoon. She has never said much publicly about that specific moment, what she felt, what went through her mind. That particular door stays mostly closed. But here is what she has said, in fragments, across different interviews over the years. She grieved him, genuinely, deeply, despite the divorce, despite everything. And then she spent the next several decades protecting the version of him the world needed to believe in. The question she has only recently started answering out loud is this: was that protection something she owed him, or was it something she owed herself? A way to make sense of the years she gave to a man who was, in ways she is only now fully naming, hiding something from everyone around him, including the woman who shared his home, his name, and his bed. She does not answer that question cleanly, but she is finally asking it in public, and that alone changes everything. Why she stayed silent for 3 decades. 3 weeks after Elvis died, the tabloids came for Priscilla, not with sympathy, with questions, pointed ones, about the drugs, about the women he had kept company with on tour, about the state of Graceland's finances, about whether the king had died broke, surrounded by yes men who let it happen. Priscilla sat through all of it without flinching publicly. She gave measured interviews, she was gracious, she was composed, she said the right things about grief and legacy and what Elvis meant to the world. And then she got to work. Elvis had died, leaving his estate in serious trouble. The numbers were alarming. At the time of his death, his fortune had shrunk dramatically from its peak. Years of lavish spending, a massive payroll for the Memphis Mafia, the Graceland upkeep, the jets, the cars, the impulsive generosity that had no off switch. The Colonel, Tom Parker, Elvis's longtime manager, had taken a staggering percentage of everything Elvis earned for decades. What remained was not the empire people assumed. Priscilla became the co-executor of Elvis's estate alongside the National Bank of Commerce in Memphis. Lisa Marie was 9 years old. She stood to inherit everything when she turned 25, but if nothing changed, there would be nothing left to inherit. Priscilla made a decision. She was going to save it. She opened Graceland to the public in June of 1982. That decision alone was considered radical at the time. The idea of turning a dead man's private home into a tourist destination struck many people as undignified, exploitative even. Priscilla pushed through the criticism. She was right. Within the first year, over 500,000 people walked through those gates. The estate began generating real revenue. Graceland became one of the most visited private homes in America, second only to the White House. That turnaround is her work, entirely. But here is what that project cost her, beyond time and energy. It locked her into a role, permanently, publicly. She became the guardian of Elvis's legacy, the woman who kept the flame burning, and that role came with an unspoken contract. You do not complicate the myth you are profiting from. There was also Lisa Marie to consider. Everything Priscilla built, every business decision, every carefully worded interview, every time she redirected a journalist away from the darker corners of Elvis's life, she was building something for her daughter. Lisa Marie's inheritance, Lisa Marie's birthright, the name, the estate, the royalties, the image rights. All of it depended on Elvis remaining beloved, untouchable, the king. The moment Priscilla started pulling threads, the whole thing risked unraveling. So she didn't pull threads, she tucked them in, smoothed the surface, presented the version of Elvis that the world could sustain its love for. That is not a small thing to carry for 30 years. There is something else that rarely gets mentioned in these conversations. Priscilla still loved him, not romantically. That had ended before he died. But she had given her entire adolescence and most of her 20s to this man. He was the father of her only child. He had shaped her, constrained her, and also, in his way, adored her. Grief does not follow a clean line when the relationship was that complicated. She has said in interviews that she mourned him deeply, even though the marriage had been over for 4 years when he died. That kind of grief is hard to explain to people who are looking for a simple narrative. The world wanted her to be either the devoted widow or the bitter ex-wife. She was neither. She was something much harder to package. And so, she stayed quiet about the harder parts. The machine around Elvis's legacy also made silence easier to maintain. Graceland Enterprises grew into something enormous. Merchandise, licensing deals, tribute concerts, museum expansions, the Elvis Presley Boulevard business district that built up around the estate. Every year, Elvis's birthday and the anniversary of his death brought fresh waves of media attention, fresh revenue, fresh reasons to keep the mythology intact. Priscilla was at the center of all of it. She approved what got released. She participated in documentaries selectively. She showed up to the events that mattered. She was the living, breathing seal of authenticity on everything bearing his name. Walking away from the silence would have meant walking away from all of that. And more than the money, it would have meant dismantling something she had spent decades constructing with her own hands. So, what changed? Honestly, age changed it. Priscilla Presley turned 79 in May of 2024. She has watched Lisa Marie die. Her daughter, the child she protected all of this for, passed away in January of 2023 from cardiac arrest. She was 54. After that, the calculus shifted. The person she had built the myth for was gone, and Priscilla, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, had no one left to protect except herself. That is when the silence started cracking. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in interviews over the past year, in careful asides and unguarded moments, she has started saying things that the Priscilla of 20 years ago would never have said out loud. She has started telling the truth, her version of it, on her terms. Finally, what she's actually saying now. She did not call a press conference. There was no dramatic sit-down with a primetime anchor, no ghost-written memoir dropped with a publicity tour, no carefully orchestrated moment designed to maximize impact. Priscilla Presley has been doing something quieter and, in some ways, more unsettling than any of that. She has been talking, in podcast appearances, in smaller interviews, in unscripted moments where the usual PR guardrails seem to have loosened. And what is coming out of those conversations is not the approved version of Elvis Presley that she spent 3 decades curating. It is something rawer, more honest, and considerably harder to dismiss. She keeps returning to the subject of control. In an interview in late 2024, Priscilla described what it felt like to be shaped by Elvis from the time she was a teenager. She did not use the word manipulation. She is too careful for that, even now. But she described a process of gradual replacement, her preferences replaced by his, her instincts overridden by his certainty, her appearance redesigned to match an image he carried in his head before she had fully formed one of her own. She said, and this is close to a direct quote, that she sometimes looks at photographs of herself from the Graceland years and sees him more than she sees herself. Let that land for a second. A woman in her late 70s, looking at pictures of her younger self, and the person she sees most clearly is the man standing next to her. That is not a small admission. That is the kind of thing you only say when you have finally stopped protecting someone else's story at the expense of your own. She has also started talking about loneliness. Not the abstract loneliness of being misunderstood. The specific daily loneliness of living inside Elvis's world with no real exit and no one to talk to who existed outside of his orbit. She described a particular kind of silence that settled over Graceland when Elvis was away on tour. The house stayed fully staffed. The gates stayed locked. Life continued on his schedule even when he was not there to keep it. She was in her early 20s, alone in a 14-acre estate in Memphis, waiting. She has said she threw herself into motherhood, partly because Lisa Marie gave her a purpose that did not require Elvis's presence or approval. That is a significant thing to admit. It suggests that by the time Lisa Marie was born, Priscilla had already started recognizing how little of her life she actually owned. Then there is what she is saying about the final years. She has not gone into granular detail about the substance dependency. She is still protective there, but she has confirmed, more plainly than before, that the Elvis she knew in the last years of his life was not the same man she had met in Germany. She described a version of him that was increasingly difficult to reach, present physically, absent in the ways that mattered. She used the phrase going through the motions in reference to certain periods of their marriage, which for someone as measured as Priscilla is about as close to devastating as her language gets. She has also addressed the women. Elvis was not faithful. That was an open secret inside his world for years. On tour in Las Vegas, there were other women, consistently. Priscilla has acknowledged this more directly in recent conversations than she ever did when the estate's reputation was her primary responsibility. She does not dwell on it, but she does not deflect it anymore either. She names it briefly without theater and moves on. The absence of drama in how she says it somehow makes it hit harder. What she is not saying is equally telling. She is not saying Elvis was a bad man. She refuses that framing completely. When interviewers push her toward condemnation, she pulls back. She talks about his generosity, his charisma, the genuine warmth he was capable of, the way he could make a room feel like the most important place on earth just by being in it. She holds both things simultaneously. The man who shaped and constrained her, the man she genuinely loved. That complexity is what makes her recent honesty so much more credible than a straightforward takedown would be. She is not settling scores. She is not rebranding herself as a victim. She is doing something more difficult and more rare. She is revising the record without burning it down. But here is the line that keeps echoing. The man I married was not who the world thought he was. She has said versions of this multiple times now across different interviews. And what she means, when you pull all of it together, is not that Elvis was secretly evil, or that the music was a lie, or that the love was fake. What she means is that the world got a performance, a magnificent one of the greatest performances in the history of popular culture. But behind the performance was a man who was struggling, hiding, controlling, and slowly disappearing into something that nobody around him knew how to stop. She saw it up close. She lived inside it. And for 30 years, she kept that knowledge mostly to herself. She is not keeping it to herself anymore. Priscilla Presley spent half her life building a shrine to a man she is only now fully describing. Not the king, not the myth, the actual man. Flawed, complicated, brilliant, and in ways she is still carefully measuring, someone very different from the figure the world chose to remember. She is 79 years old. She has buried her daughter. She has nothing left to protect. And maybe that is exactly why she is finally talking. The question worth sitting with is this: how many other women have spent decades guarding a version of someone that never fully existed? If this story made you think, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it. We have more coming.